open our time this morning and thank you and invite Stephen forward to introduce himself and give his presentation with County Counsel.
Thank you, Budget Committee. I am Stephen Madcore. I am County Counsel, and I am here to present for the committee's consideration the fiscal year 17-18 operating budget for the Office of County Counsel. The proposal is for a budget of approximately $2.76 million, which is an increase of approximately $300,000 over last year's budget, approximately 12%. That increase is attributed to increases in personnel costs, fringe benefits, also increases in office rent because we moved to a new location on the second floor, which is larger and costs more, and also we have more technology in that new office space. We have larger copiers, we have larger printers, we have all of our attorneys housed under one office space as opposed to spread throughout the county. In addition, we have included in the budget proposal for next year, or for this coming year, a $50,000 line item for litigation coverage associated with community planning organizations, and that is being placed in the Office of County Counsel. Those would be restricted funds, which would only be used for obtaining outside counsel in the event that a CPO were to be sued in their official capacity. That's an issue that has been coming to a head over the course of a number of years where CPOs get sued and they're not agents of the county. It's rather long and protracted, but that's where that money is placed currently. So that adds to the 12% increase that we have. Our office is broken down into three different lines of business as a result of performance clackamas. We have county operations legal support, which consists of the advisory, the regulatory, and the transactional work, reviewing contracts, assisting water environment services in water compliance and environmental compliance, and advising various county departments. We also have litigation and labor, which is suing and being sued, and also our employment practices in our labor negotiations. We have 8 bargaining units. We bargain with them on a regular basis. We have 2,000 employees. We have employee disputes, grievances, discipline matter on a daily basis, so that's where that work is. The Office of County Counsel aids the board, aids other elected officials, deals with public records, deals with budget, annual reports, more the administrative, managerial aspect of things. The advisory transactional work group we have 12.5 staff total. We have 10 attorneys. We have the rest is 1 full-time staff and 2 part-time paralegals. We had a new attorney that was added last year to aid in the advisory transactional work as well as the litigation work as well. We're fully complemented right now. We currently have 2 volunteer clerks that are working right now and will for the summer, who are volunteering up to 30 hours a week to experience public sector law and to aid our office in doing some more clerk-oriented work. So that's the total line item for this group is $796, about $500 from the general fund. We bill to special districts. West essentially is a special district, CCSD number 1 and Tri-City Service District. Those legal fees are billed to those districts. We have 1 in-house attorney, Amanda Keller, who works exclusively for West. So her complete salary, benefits, is payable to West. Her office space used to be paid by West, but now that she's in our space, we pay for that. So there has been a little bit of a different change in that regard. There are other special districts that we bill to, the lighting district, 4-H district, and things along those. We have up to 8 special districts that we bill to in that regard. Revenues, costs, relatively consistent with that. Where we will have some deviation is in our litigation group because we cannot control the amount of lawsuits that we face. We currently have about 25 new cases filed against us on an annual basis. We get about 90 tort claim notices, which is a prerequisite to filing a lawsuit. And those cases don't include LUBA appeals. They don't include tax and assessment issues. These are risk cases where we bill to the risk fund itself. And those are some of the billings that you see here. Services to General Fund Department 625. We will bill out our litigators and paralegal staff at $60 and $124 an hour respectively for the work associated with defending the county in risk associated cases. Those are personal injury cases, those are property damage cases. They're not breach of contract cases, they're not disputes with other entities. So those majority take up are based on claims coming out of the sheriff's office, be it patrol or the jail or community corrections, which is not unusual. That's relatively a static figure with this jurisdiction, as well as a lot of other public jurisdictions that have police enforcement agencies or jails. Majority of litigation comes out of the jail. What we did in the significant changes issues is over the course of the year, we've had the opportunity to more closely track and monitor who's doing what and for what departments. So we were able to more closely align what direct staff time is associated with defending cases, with prepping witnesses, with doing investigations. And so that's why we have some of the deviation. A lot of our time is devoted to lawsuits, and that's how come instead of just taking it beforehand, it was just 1/3 of our staff devoted to it. This is a much more focused and specific allocation of resources towards a particular line of business. Third line of business is the Office of County Counsel program, which I said is more of the administrative, negotiating IGAs, negotiating with other public entities, advising the Board of County Commissioners and other electeds, dealing with public records requests, aiding the Sheriff's Office in a variety of things. And so that's the smaller area. That's 444,000 general fund. It's about 400,000 of that. Those are primarily, you know, a lot of our clients are non-billable, like the board is non-billable. We track time, but it's not a revenue generating entity. We only really generate revenue and bill from entities that have their own source of separate monies. Again, we restructured that a tiny bit because that went down. There's fewer attorneys and staff associated with that particular line of business. As I mentioned, our request for the upcoming fiscal year is $2.763 million. I submit that we are very responsible stewards of the public's dollars, that the county gets a lot of bang for the buck here. We are primarily people, paper, and pencils. It's staff. It's staff dollars is what it is. We don't have a lot of travel budget. We don't have a lot of other luxuries. We love our new office, and we thank the board for that. But we're very tight with our revenues. We also had the remodel from last year, which what I said is $250,000, and that will be able to grow into that office for the far future, in my estimation. Hourly fees remain consistent. Billable hours continue to rise because we have more attorneys to bill more, and we have more cases to work on. Again, expenditures are PR or personnel expenditures with fringe benefits and the expanded office equipment. Over the course of the last 3 years, the Budget Committee allocated to us $50,000 to upgrade our timekeeping and billing software. What we did with that after exploring various options, we just renewed the license on the LexisNexis program that we had. That was $1,000 per user. That allowed us not to have to go out and spend and learn a whole new software package. And so we did that, and it's been effective and successful, but we're also asking for some of that money to be carried over to allow us to fund something called Disco, which is a cloud-based document management system, because we go through so much discovery and litigation nowadays. We have cases that have 20,000 documents that need to be organized. Our hard drives can't take that, so we upload it consistent with TS policy. We're able to bait stamp it, inventory it, and when we're done with the case, we can cold storage that stuff. So the cost is based on a data plan per month. And so if the case is over, we pull it out and get rid of that. And it's very affordable, and it's been a very effective tool for litigation purposes. So we're asking for a passover or a continuance of $29,000 to allow us to be able to enjoy the benefits of that program itself. We also have in there $5,000 for some furniture to basically furnish some of our offices for our clerks. I'll tell the committee that we have been very successful in picking over the pile of surplus furniture that we have over in the storage facility. And we have furniture from the DA's office, from the court, from a variety of different offices throughout the county. So we're not particularly selective. We just need a desk and a chair and things like that. So that concludes the presentation for County Council. Happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, and we have some questions. So I think Commissioner Savas is first, and then Wilda was raising her. Was Wilda first, or was Commissioner Savas? And then we've got Tom and.
No, I think so.
Okay, Commissioner Savas, and then
I'm fine going last.
Wilda, Tom, Eric, and Sonia.
Okay, so
We have
my
that too.
question, Stephen, and maybe it's a question, maybe the administrator can jump in on this one too, is I'm looking at your charges for service and just to being aware of the allocated cost model. I would presume that your work is impacted or generated, less or more from one department or departments than others, right? And therefore, that ought to be kind of billed out. But I only see that, less than half of your charges for service, it's less than half of your total payroll. Your payroll is about 2 million something, and your charges for service are about 900,000 some odd. So,
We're 65% supported by the general fund.
okay, so why don't we bill out those general fund supported departments on an allocated cost model?
I would say that that's been a recurring question and issue and struggle. One of the problems associated with that is you might get a client who doesn't seek out your services because they don't have a line item for legal services. And in fact, I actually encourage people to ask questions first, and we'll worry about the billing component of it later, because we need to be there on the front end opposed to the back end. And the people that we do bill are, like I said, the special districts that have a revenue source themselves, and it's money's kind of circulated through the county in that manner. And also the risk department, where funding is put into the risk fund based on past exposure. It's kind of like an insurance underwriter. That's coming through Dwayne and risk management. Those are litigation cases, and that's what we bill on. But certainly for the board itself, we don't bill the board. We keep time for it to see how much time we associate with board activity, but we don't bill you because we want you to be freely accessible to us.
Well, yeah, but I would still presume, in all fairness, that, if you spent X amount of time or your staff spent time serving the board's needs, that would be part of our allocated cost model in all fairness, and that, you would get support, but indirectly, you would get it from the charges for service, so.
If you wanted to put us in allocated costs, that'd be fine.
Well, no, you're charging for service. I just got, maybe the administrator could chime in on this one as to why we're not doing more of that.
Well, so for our general fund departments, what we would end up doing is simply taking the appropriation that goes to county council and budgeting that in a line item in the general fund departments. So it'd be kind of an even Steven trade. It's a question of how you account for it, is all.
Well, yeah, it was just seeing that maybe some other, we're kind of basically subsidizing other departments. If one's a key generator of the cost, just on the personnel side, I'm not even talking about whether it's awards or damages or court costs, I'm just looking at the personnel side, that time ought to be billed, put aside the awards.
I think
Or
by
losses.
and large, I mean, the rates are sort of structured for what would be the departments that rely on special revenues or are operating under funds outside of the general fund, which is why we put allocated costs together, so we can charge those funds and recover those funds. So the general fund is not actually subsidizing those component units and those other county operations. So the idea there is to set a rate structure that is uniform and consistent in terms of how it gets applied to the various departments. There are occasionally anomalies where there may be significant or special work that may get applied that might require something unique or special done with a particular department. But like I say, it's a question of accounting in terms of the general fund contribution, because we take that general fund contribution and we then parse that out to the general fund departments, and we charge them for the money we've parsed out to them to then get recovered back into the county council's fund. So,
And there's a cost to doing that too. I mean, you have accountants billing and people reviewing bills.
Well, you know, I'm just looking at, I'll leave it at this, I won't belabor the point, but I don't see it much different than the power bill or the space bill or the IT, cost for IT or any of that, in the sense that, you know, there's ongoing, especially if one department is more of a burden than another department. That's my key thing there.
Okay, thank you. Wilda, do you have a comment?
Yeah,
Then
thanks. Yeah, I have
Tom,
a couple
and
of
then
just
Eric.
quick questions. The 29K for disco, is that spread throughout your various areas in the materials and services budget? Is that where we'd see that, the carryover?
It would be used just for litigation purposes. It would
Litigation,
probably go
okay.
into subscriptions because it's a monthly charge itself, and it's something that ideally we would like to have a line item devoted to, cloud-based data storage litigation. We're just kind of testing this one out. We've used it for 3 cases. It's been very effective and successful, so we want to continue that.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
okay. Thank that, and that makes good sense that you'd need that ongoing also for that. On special districts, NCPRD is also one of those that you supply services for. So I was just curious if the Supreme Court decision on recreational immunity and eliminating that from jurisdictions had any effect on the county, and if the state legislature adds back recreational immunity for volunteers and employees and whatever that work in those kinds of areas, will that be a benefit for the legal office?
But my understanding is that the legislature is right on the verge of passing legislation, basically establishing recreational immunity in a manner that we had thought it was.
Exactly,
And that would
reinstating
be
that.
certainly beneficial. It did cause a little angst with the Parks District over the course of the year and a half since that Supreme Court opinion. We have not had any cases based on the lack of immunity, which basically said that the employee can be sued, but the entity still enjoys immunity. So Scott Archer could get sued, but the Parks District was still immune.
And volunteers could get sued.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this would cure that. So we were big, our advocacy folks were big proponents of restoring recreational immunity at the legislature. So we were very strong advocates in that front.
Good, yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about your performance measurements. First one under advisory, transactional, and regulatory. You talk about, I'm on page 4. Percent of contracts reviewed within X days. My question is, what's X? How many days?
Oh, let's see, they didn't put that in.
We have in our,
Sure, they meant to put a number in there.
Well, it just says X. Maybe it says
yeah,
30.
we established,
Solve the equation. X equals.
X equals how many?
How many days?
we were looking at 7 days is what we're looking at in terms of responding to contracts, letting people know that we had it within 2 days and responding within 7 days.
Okay. Thank you. And then under litigation, labor, and employment, percent employment terminations and separations that result in a lawsuit or arbitration. Your actual for last year and then projected for this year is 50%, but your goal is 25. Is it really 50%?
You know, I will say that I'm not necessarily a believer that performance
Okay.
clackamas measures can fit squarely within our department and practice area, and I've expressed that skepticism beforehand. We can't control what necessarily the courts do and how many disgruntled employees we have. We try consistently to minimize risk, and no in exposure and no performance measure in that regard is really going to guide us or aid us. We can aspire to it. We want to win all cases. Not all cases are winnable.
No, and I understand that, but is 50% the real number? Like half your terminations end up in court or arbitration?
Oh, yeah. Oh, but it's probably
Is
a
that
little,
mostly
it's
public
probably,
safety?
what's that?
Is that mostly the sheriff's office?
It will probably be if we have a employee leaving county employment prematurely, we make a very strong concerted effort to get that employee out without exposure to the county.
Right,
We
I
will
understand
negotiate separation agreements. We will sometimes give a severance package. There's a union employee versus a contract
No,
employee. The
I've lived that life for 30 years, I understand.
Public employers are deep pocket defendants for employment claims. We have a lot of employment claims, yeah. So we try our best to do it, but we really can't control a lot of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Eric, go ahead. And, yes, remind your mic.
I've got a couple here. Page 4 and 5. The percent of client inquiries responded to within 7 working days. You had a target of 16, 17 at 100%, and the performance was 80%. And I was wondering why the drop, considering that you're resetting the target at 17, 18 at 100%. It would seem to me that if you're looking at an inquiry, you should be able to respond within an hour, let alone 7 days.
First off, Mr. Hofield, I'm sorry, you say pages 4 and 5 of what? We have two different numbers on these pages, so.
The book.
Page 4 and 5 of the budget, that's the document that I have had to work with, not the slide.
Okay, I'm sorry, one more time, sir, what is your question?
Why not
Okay, well,
100%?
Tom dealt with the first one, which was the contracts reviewed within 2 days. Is that what you said?
7.
Was that-
Inquiry response within 2 days saying, hey, we got this, we're looking at it.
Okay. The other one was the client inquiries responded within 7 days, and you have a drop in performance from 100% to 80%. And my question is that
target.
reasonable? Considering it shouldn't take that long to respond to a client inquiry.
Well, this is a formal client inquiry too. I think in terms of client inquiries, you'll find us to be very responsive, and I think that the majority of folks would attest to that. A formal client inquiry would be something that requires probably an analysis, a written opinion, and a little additional research associated with it. But if folks tell us that it's an ASAP project, we certainly make our best effort to get it handled as quickly as possible.
Okay. And then, this is a nit before I go on to other questions, but the FY 17-18 is not an adopted budget. It's a proposed budget. And so this is just a note for the staff over there that this particular budget should not
We
read.
realized that, and some of them, we thought we corrected it. Apparently, we didn't get all of the columns corrected.
Okay. Let's see. Litigation program, page 8 and 9 of the budget. You have percentage, you list percentages, but the question that I brought up to other directors is it would be helpful to know how many of that number you're looking at. So 75% of 10 is a lot different than 75% of 100. You see what I'm saying?
I do,
So-
sir.
So if you could list, okay, out of so many, that would be great.
Absolutely. We're also in the process of revising some of these performance standards because we found them a little bit unmanageable, and we can target them a bit better and have better data to report to you next time.
Okay, just keep that in mind, that if you present a percent, it's better to give us some perspective of what that percent represents.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you.
Let's see, and then on page 12 and 13, dealing with the Office of County Counsel program. And I have this same comment there about how many in terms of the performance indicator. But then the second comment I have has to do with the fact that you have local grants and revenues of 140 in the amendment budget, 50,000 in projected, and 50,000 in the And yet I look over here on the left-hand side, page 12, and it indicates grant funding of no. And there's no explanation of why that is, so it seems to be an inconsistency. The same comment would apply to litigation, the litigation program, pages 8 and 9. You have grants listed as grant funding.
I'm not aware of any grants that our office gets, so I share your confusion associated with that.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Madcorn. Would that
let's
be
see.
fees from cities?
It would be.
That would
both.
be a line, a category where I would expect to see that. When you charge a city or another entity for
Local.
work that you've done.
Revenues then.
And that would be the 1,000 or the 900, but not 140 or 50,000, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, charges for services.
It very well might be revenues, but we do not get local grants that I'm aware of.
Okay. Now I'm on the summary on page 14 and 15, and I'm looking at the general fund support numbers. FY 15-16 general fund support was $405,163. The 16-17 projection is $379,995. That's a total in 2 years of $785,158. And yet you're proposing 1.8 million for 17-18. So my question is, what's driving that significant increase in the general fund support?
The increases that our office has over the course of the last, in general, are personnel and fringe benefits. Between 16 and 17, the increase is the size of our office. Our rent went up. Our technology costs, computers and copiers and printers because of the larger office, those went up. And we also had $50,000 from the CPO Defense Fund that goes into there as well. My understanding is we have a $300,000 increase from 16-17 to 17-18, or $298,000. And that's what that is attributed to.
So it's just rent?
It is rent, it is computers, it's personnel costs and fringe benefits associated with that.
Yeah, because you didn't increase any staff. It's 12,
We
still
did have-
12 and a half.
We had one new
12.5.
attorney added last year. And so, for example, though, regular full-time employment went up from 1.2 to 138. The fringe benefits, 680 to 814. Those are items that I really have very little to no control over in terms of fringe benefit costs. Computer went from 5,000 to 10,000. Or casualty insurance 34 to 39. Office rental 53 to 66, and we added the 50,000 for the CPO.
Yeah, but none of those items would add up to twice what the general fund support was for the last 2 years. And that's what you're proposing is a general fund support of 1.8 million, which is twice what it was in actuality for the last 2 years.
And I really can't speak to that offhand.
I would like to get an answer to that, please, from the budget staff over there. And if you have a question of where I'm getting those numbers, just ask.
Okay, I'm confused about the twice. What figure are you comparing the 1.8 million to? Current budget year was almost 1.6 million. So it's going up $237,000 budget to budget this year to next.
Don't you have $1,818,617 proposed for 17-18?
Yes.
All right.
And for the current year, the comparable amount is almost 1.6 million for a difference of $237,000.
The delta between FY 15-16 actual and 16-17 projected
Okay.
is $405,000.
And looking at this, I see the difference in personnel, probably vacant positions. So the difference between what's actually, what's an actual personnel cost versus a budgeted cost that would assume all positions are filled. That's what I
Okay.
see for the difference between the actual and the budget. The other figures are fairly similar.
And we also had sizable revenues. We had 200,000 higher in revenues essentially for 15, 16.
That's true.
For, it looks like a lot of Wes, and it looked like library districts and internal legal fees too. So I see what you're saying, Mr. Hofeld. It did go from 1.03 million general fund to 1.8 between 15 and 17, but it might be kind of like an aberration because it was 1.16 on 14, 15 and 1.5 on 16, 17. And we did have greater revenues from outside sources, it looks like also.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want me to find out what specifically led to the increase, because we had over $1 million in revenue compared to last year, 940, and compared to the year prior to 14, 15, we estimated 860, but we had 1.3 million revenues.
Yeah.
So,
It-
good point.
Is, my other question I have is, just an aside, is Wes on a contract? Because I notice you're looking at them as a constant source of revenue here. Are you on some kind of a retainer?
No, it's just that the attorney works for me, but we just bill her out 2080. That's the annual hours to Wes at
She
her
is on,
current.
so she is on a retainer.
Well, she's devoted exclusively to them. There's no written document between the 190 and/or Wes and my office, but we just assign her to that full time. But
Okay.
essentially, she's devoted entirely to Wes.
Okay. And then the last question I have, and you'll be glad. The graphs in the summary, again, I'm on there. Operating expenses I see are outpacing revenues. And in 16-17 versus 17-18 projected, personal services, and I'm assuming the cost allocation charges go in there as well. That's an increase of $406,000. If you take 284 plus 90 plus 31, that's 406 in 1 year. That's a pretty substantial increase. And my question is, how do you justify a 1-year change of $400,000 in the personal services area? Including the cost allocation charges?
We have not increased our hourly rates in 6 years. We're at 124 for lawyers. We're at 66 for paralegals. The work stays the same. So
These are expenditures, not revenues.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, are you saying that your attorneys are being paid $124 an hour?
No,
That's a
they're
low
not.
rate.
That is the cost. But if our revenues stay flat, then it's going to be disproportionate with every year there's COLA increases and there's other increases for all staff, not just attorney staff, but all staff are going to get that. And it's going to diminish it's going to increase the difference between your costs and your revenues. If we were to raise the hourly rate revenues, we might be more in keeping in parallel with the costs that are incurred to provide those services.
Is there anything keeping you from raising the rates?
It's a internal political decision, I suppose. It's part of our, it's part of the struggle with having attorneys build departments. Some would say we don't want to incur that cost because we have other priorities.
It seemed to me it'd be a disincentive for, or an incentive for departments to play it straight rather than get into a legal issue. Or would you not agree?
I agree, but folks would be having this conversation with you. Every department that had a line item budget for legal, it probably would be, why is your legal so high? And they'd all look back at my office because legal's expensive. So those are all very valid points, and we haven't necessarily perfected that model, so to speak, but we think we have it pretty good right now. We're trying to keep our costs lower, and it certainly should be reevaluated to see if our hourly rate should be increased to reflect what the actual costs associated with it are.
Yeah, I would expect your particular department to be a cost of service based entity. In other words, you charge whatever the cost is for the whole operation, and it's so much an hour. Or maybe it's more depending upon the kind of litigation versus employee dispute.
We pretty much have flat rates, other than paralegal rates, but the lawyer rate is a flat rate.
Yeah. But it's not based on cost of service.
Correct. It initially was, but like I said, the delta has grown because the cost of providing that service has increased, but the cost charge has not increased.
Is that something the,
I was just gonna say, I'd be happy to explore the issue of the rates that are charged in the ensuing budget year. We'd have a conversation with our executive management team about the pricing that would go into that, and we'd probably end up bringing back an updated rate structure for what would be the budget for next year.
is that the desire of the Board of County Commissioners?
I don't think we've really talked about it. That would be like a work session.
Well, you know, you're billing one another and the allocated costs are already pretty high and people don't like that and it doesn't really matter. It's not like the money goes in your pocket.
I understand that, but if I had a choice between doing something the right way and not getting into trouble versus just incurring a legal fee, it would be a lot more incentive to do it right rather than incur the legal department over here. As a
Well, we
cost
would
to
like
my
to put
budget.
them out of business anyway, so, but that ain't gonna happen.
If I
I
may,
just want to say, I don't mind exploring that particular question. With other cost allocation rates and formulas, we do evaluate them on a regular basis. We make changes and updates, and there's no reason why we wouldn't examine this. We would want to have a discussion with affected departments and offices about how that might affect their operations, because I certainly would not want the rate structure to detract from individuals seeking and securing proper legal advice. On the other hand, if the rate structure is falling behind, that goes to the question that Commissioner Savas asked early on, is that making sure that the rate structure is such that the general fund doesn't subsidize the other component
funds.
unit operations. And so with that in mind, I'd be happy to follow up with the County Counsel's office on that.
I think that'd be good.
Yeah. Okay, that's the only questions I have. Thank you.
thank you.
Got a couple more, Commissioner Fisher and then Commissioner Humberson.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I so appreciate that you and your legal staff are available to answer questions for the board and really help frame our thinking and our ability to set good policy. And I think that your shop does excellent work, so I wanted to preface with that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And that being said, I was intrigued by the performance measures, kind of following up with what Tom said. I was like, wow, 50% in terminations. That was really, I don't like that if 50% of our separations end up in some sort of legal issue, that's a concern to me. And then the other sort of red flag or question that I had was to try to keep things out. We resolve 75%, that's our target, that's our goal with IGAs or resolution or settlements. And so just my question, and you don't have to answer this now, I think this is food for thought to take back, is what would be helpful, I think for us as a board, is to understand where the data is to come up with the numbers, because I think those are important. We want, I think I can speak for all of us here, we want to reduce litigation and resolve conflicts. So if we can get really good performance measures as to really how many do end up in litigation, I think that for our employment separations, that would be helpful. And what are we resolving outside of court? I don't like it that we have a performance of 75% and a goal of 75%. I would like us to have a goal that's greater than our performance when it comes to resolving disputes out of court. So if there's a way to improve that, that would be requested.
There's always room for improvement, and we will try to provide you with data on, it might be difficult, on how many employees leave and how many result in some type of litigation or other claim, but we can try to provide those.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Commissioner Humberson.
My concern is going back to the previous conversation in terms of billing the departments at a higher level. Since you don't have control over whether or not somebody files a lawsuit, it strikes me that it wouldn't be very difficult to bankrupt a department based on a different model than what we're currently doing, which then ends up in the general fund bailing out the department anyway. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to go down the road of billing as if you are a private law firm, if you will. That what we're essentially doing right now manages as best you can as far as the departments are concerned. As far as performance measures that were referred to by Commissioner Fishner, I don't have a problem with looking at those, but I'm not sure going down the road of increasing the cost to any given department accomplishes what we would want to accomplish, because you're going to just end up having to bail out the department with the general fund, which is what you're doing anyway by general fund support for the legal office. That's my comment.
All right, thanks. Ed, do you have a comment and question? Or question?
Can it
Go
be a
ahead.
question?
It can be a question, yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
When you say litigation, what do you mean by that? There's several different types. So is that union, you talk to the union, or you actually go to court, or?
Under our business line of litigation, it includes labor and employment, so it would include labor grievances and discipline arising out of any represented employee's claim or discipline, and that's probably going to be 1,900 different employees that we would have eligible for that. It also includes all employment-related litigation, which would be discrimination, harassment, constructive discharge, wrongful discharge, hostile work environment, that type of litigation. It would also fall under if there were internal investigations, so-and-so harassed or threatened me, or so-and-so is using county resources for improper purposes. We devote lawyer time to that. That would be couched under litigation. Litigation also includes the various cases that we find ourselves being subjected to, use of force cases at the jail, unlawful arrest cases on patrol, ADA-based claims because the jail's not accommodating hearing impaired or vision impaired inmates over there, litigation related to the Sunrise Corridor, litigation related to the Carver Bridge and the water line dispute, litigation related to Bell Avenue with the dispute on a contractor. So the body of litigation is very broad. It includes everything from A to Z. Our dispute we're being sued by Gladstone over the library proceeds. That's not risk fund charged litigation, but that still is in our litigation employment labor line of business.
So that is part of that 50%, or it's all part of that 50%? I was looking for employee litigation, I'm sorry.
Out of employment litigation, how much that consumes? Employment consumes quite a bit. And in terms of labor disputes and actual employment litigation, I think right now I'd have to take a look, but we have a wage claim in our office right now. We have a harassment discrimination claim in our office right now. We probably have 6 grievances. We have an unfair labor practice claim at the Court of Appeals based on testing for medical marijuana. And that's all under the labor employment matrix of sorts. So we have a lot of labor. Labor is it's a hot area of law right now.
So it goes from grievances all the way to court? The
Yes,
Court of
sir.
Appeals?
It
Okay,
can,
That's
yes.
what I wanted to know. Thank
Yep.
you.
And we have it all broken down as well. We keep a summary sheet of all of our ongoing litigation, everything from tax and assessment to land use to labor to employment to unlawful, unfair labor practice claims and tort claims as well. And that's probably a 20-page long document that we occasionally give the board a briefing on.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas.
My comment earlier, as we talked about the tracking and whether that's for internal purposes or for billing purposes, I think it's a valuable exercise. And I speak as an employer almost my entire life. Terminations are never easy. And you're lucky if it does not somehow result in some kind of a challenge, whether that is through whatever departments there may be. And I don't necessarily mean that internally in the county. I'm just even from the private sector. But the more rules or union or labor that's involved, and the more difficult it becomes. So even on a voluntary leave or a voluntary quit, you can still have challenges to certain things. So again, it's never easy, but I think it's worth tracking. The reason I think it's worth tracking is because And I have a lot of friends in business. If you have a certain supervisor or department where maybe there's more terminations in that particular department than another, that might be an indicator from a management standpoint. If another company has a poor record of hiring, and you don't screen people well enough, that's a burden. So those indicators and tracking that, whether it's internal, and that's held on the upper management aspect, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise, because otherwise you really don't know. And I think same thing goes with billing, whether you look at it from a subsidy standpoint or you look at it from, this is a good bookkeeping, but I think it's a worthy exercise from a tracking standpoint. It's a lot easier to understand, I think, if you've been there and employed people. You kind of understand, you want to learn from your mistakes as best you can, but the bigger your company is, the more managers you have, you need to learn how they're doing as well. And they also need to learn exactly how they're doing in comparison to others. Now, some industries have more issues than other industries, so it's not fair to compare department by department if that particular trade or industry has a unique exposure rate.
Thank you. All right, Eric.
Yeah, I just have some final comments to build on what Commissioner Savas said. Do you, after each trial, litigation, suit, or whatever, do you have some kind of a post-mortem among your attorneys to see when you, particularly in those cases when you lost, do you evaluate that and determine, okay, where were the issues here? Why did we not win the suit? And is it our fault, or is it the fault of the departments? And if it's the fault of the departments, do you have some kind of a training program for department managers to alert them to the fact that, hey, we just lost this suit because you didn't do this, this, and this? Can you make sure you do that going forward? Because I'm a little concerned over the fact that your opening comment was that the county is the deep sock. Everybody knows all they have to do is sue the county and they get a settlement. And, you know, I'm looking at the fact that a couple of years ago, we just paid out $28 million. That's not a small amount of money to the individual taxpayer trying to make property tax payments and so forth. So I guess my question is, and getting to back to Commissioner Fisher's comments as well, how do you get that win rate up, other than, you know, either doing a better job in the courtroom or doing a better job of informing the management that they need to do certain things to make sure we do win?
I think the term I used was deep pocket, and if I gave this group the impression that the county's an easy target and pays out easily, that's the wrong impression. We're clearly an easy target, but we are very stingy, we're very tight, we're very zealous advocates of the public purse. If the case needs to be tried, we will try it, and if we do lose it, and we do have a lessons learned walkthrough with the department, with the primary witnesses, internally with the lawyers, and with Don Krupp and finance and other departments that might have had some involvement in the matter itself. We just recently did that, and we will do that on a regular basis. But when we win cases, we don't go through and toot our horn and say, this is how we won it and this is what we're doing great. We try to capitalize off of lessons learned to ensure that they don't happen again. If we can take curative action, we will try to instruct in that manner. We do provide training on a number of fronts. It's difficult at times, as you can imagine, to control 2,000 employees and what they say in email or what they say to each other in the workplace, but we do have a very robust follow-up program associated with that. And we did not pay out $28 million as any claim that I'm aware of. It might have been the light rail thing is what you're talking about, but we didn't pay out $28 million, not on my watch.
It's in the CAFR, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, a couple years ago. Claims paid, $28+ million.
Those are benefit claims, health benefit claims.
Okay.
They're not, those aren't personnel discipline.
Different claim.
Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen, I appreciate your
All right.
responses.
Okay.
Diana had a follow-up comment, and then
Okay. Maybe not to belabor the point, but I think there's maybe a misunderstanding in saying that 50% of all separations involve some sort of involvement of your office. You're not talking about all separations, like when people retire or go on to a new job, are you? It's
No.
50% of those that are under other circumstances.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for the point of clarification. Commissioner Bernard?
I just want to add, it seems that people who sue us get more creative every year, and I mean, many times I thought, well, I'd take them to the Supreme Court rather than pay them off, but that's very expensive and costly, and that's certainly not where we want to go. And when they're big ones, the county council comes to the commission. We talk about what the process is, what the plan is, what the results are, and if they're bad results, how we address those issues with the various departments. I'm very satisfied with the work we do. The only thing that would be great is if and we've done this before, is reporting on what is the current workload. That would be about it that I'd be interested in, because sometimes we don't hear, well, I suppose there's a level of urgency that you determine whether the commission should even bother hearing about it, or the amount of the lawsuit that you probably said. Is that true?
Correct. If it's high exposure or politically sensitive, I will advise the county administration and the board as soon as possible. Any claim that requires authorization over $100,000, the board gets apprised of that one as well. Typically, if it's under $100,000, county administrator, county council, and risk manager have the authority to settle it, but we do advise the board of the status of that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, we also provide a annual county council report to the board on a policy session. That's July 23rd, and that's where we talk about workload and cost and priorities and things along those lines. And I thank you for your time and your consideration.